Welcome to Who We Are and What We Need. I'm your host, Quiring. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and an advocate for needs-honoring, needs-based society. In this podcast, we talk about how to trust and care for yourself as a person cares and feels deeply, how to understand the inner physics of human nature and our place in the world where we can flow and live harmoniously, how to support each other, thrive, and collectively challenge worldviews and systems that feed off of and perpetuate harm. In this podcast, we gently blow away the layers of noise, chaos, and reactivity so we can get to who we truly are and what we need. Thanks for joining me. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to Who We Are and What We Need. I'm your host, Quiring, and today I have with me Jenna, who I met through Megan Megginson's Express Yourself writing group, and we are in there most weeks, I think, together and really enjoy both having this space, supportive space to write together, and then we take turns sharing at the end. And it's been so delightful to hear Jenna's writing as well as her comments and presence in the space. And so I invited her to come chat with us today, and there'll be space during the podcast where she'll share one of her writings as well. So look forward to that. And right now I'm going to go ahead and let Jenna introduce herself a little bit more to you.
Thank you for the high praise, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Your work as well. My name is Jenna Richardson. I'm a full-time psychotherapist and part-time witch, I like to say.
Love that.
Working and living in Los Angeles, California, unceded Tongva and Chumash territory.
Love that. Can we go on to the witch thing? Because I just would love to hear more about that. I've been really wanting to talk with someone or have space to talk about, like, my kids love Halloween. So my son especially is watching the Halloween videos like all year round. He's 3, almost 4, and he'll be 4 by the time this airs probably. And it really is hard for me to watch the white supremacy, like colonization of so many of these like archetypes and characters in Halloween that I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, so anyway, that's my little feeling about it, and love to talk about that, or like what it means to you and how that's been for you.
Yeah.
Exploring
Yeah,
that.
I sort of fell into it by accident. I'm sure that's common.
Yeah.
But kind of entered in through astrology and then tarot, and then just kind of as you get into that community, it just widens and deepens, and you get connected with all sorts of different healers and kind of magical people, and just keep learning and learning and going and going. So, but I definitely agree with you of just the way that, you know, we have this legacy of witches being persecuted, and now it's all kind of dressed up in this sort of patriarchal white supremacist costuming to make it all cutesy and fun and
Right.
cool.
Yeah. I'm curious. So I'm just dipping my toes in astrology lately. It's been really helpful to me in explaining my like empathic or energy awareness about like what I'm feeling and what I'm noticing in like dynamics and changes and social movements and awareness, and like down to when clients have like similar experiences in a week,
Yeah.
or in a day that I'm like, that's not, I know it's not particular to them. Like, okay, I'm gonna check astrology. But it's been kind of like a back end thing at this point, and I still don't understand a whole lot of it. So, um, but it's been really helpful. So yeah, I'm curious how that is for you, and getting into that, and then the tarot and the healers, and like any part of that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so I actually got introduced to it in grad school. One of my cohort members was really into astrology and just sort of casually asked me for my birthday one day. And we
Mm-hmm.
were in kind of all the same classes. And every, week, every kind of few days, she would just drop something that she was guessing or assuming about my personality. And I
Mm-hmm.
look at my chart, I don't like people knowing more about me than I do. So I had to kind of
Mm-hmm.
figure out how she knew these things and uh, kind of get underneath all of that so that I could feel better about my.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just opened up the rabbit hole of like, I feel like the Google software was way better back then, like 15 years ago, as far as finding like all the niche information you want to
Mm-hmm.
know about astrology. And now it's a lot more kind of poppy and like cut and paste stuff
Mm-hmm.
that shows up. But Google is my best friend as far as doing a lot of that research. And then I was
Yeah.
introduced to different astrologers and the literature and the books and all the different, there's so many different ways of doing it. There's traditional astrology, which kind of goes back into the medieval times, and then
Mm-hmm.
Vedic, which is from the Indian lineage and all sorts of other types. So it really is a whole world unto itself, but it's exciting that you're exploring some of that too.
Yeah, and I feel like all of these kind of things really fit themes that have run through my life, my whole life, but I didn't realize or I never would have connected to things like that. One of my favorite book genres is magical realism. I just love it so, so much because it's that like combining of we are in everyday life, but it is slightly magical and we are not just in the practical world, but we're also in this like metaphysical like alchemy, right? Around what's happening. And the sparkle around that and the possibilities and the gifts and the perception and all of that kind of things are just I don't know, light me up. So
What have you found that has resonated with you?
as far as like magical realism,
Yeah, or astrology or
oh sure. I'll mention first the like my go-to for magical realism is Sarah Addison Allen. Like during the pandemic when I really needed some just comfort and support, I ordered all of her books because we didn't have them at our local library, and apparently, or I couldn't find them at the time. Um, Maybe they're closed. Anyway, ADHD, ADHD brain like loop there. Um, yeah, so I ordered them and read through them all again because it was such a comfort. And um, yeah, as far as astrology, I've been looking for really things that help explain like the shifts that we're in, like the move from Pisces to Aquarius has been really, really helpful to me in framing where we're at in history in this moment and giving me a lot of hope and perspective that everything I was already noticing about this kind of groundswell of organic um, healing and collective, collaborative um, work together and that people are doing similar things and not competing, but that it's enhancing each other and we're all supporting and connected, even if it's just energetically and we don't know each other. And that just feels like this vast web, hive, like whatever you want to call that interconnection of support and like groundswell of what's going to keep rising. Um, and to be a part of that is so exciting and hope-filled and inspiring and helps me feel not alone in the what's happening, what I'm doing, what I'm noticing, what I'm seeing other people in this space noticing is not isolated and it's not just going to be like put out like a candle, right? Like it's going to keep growing and there's a reason that it's coming at this moment. And this is part of how, like, I'm fascinated by social change and social movements, and this is part of how that happens,
Right.
right? So,
I love that. So it's helping you, yeah, feel connected to what's going on versus
mhm.
isolated and a little concerned.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. My only like experience with or knowledge about astrology growing up was like the horoscopes in the paper, that felt so trite and prescriptive, and like that's was so unappealing. And also I grew up in like a religious context where like astrology was evil. Um, which is so funny because of like the Magi or
Mhm.
astrologers. Like they're praised, but don't do any of that yourself. Um, so yeah, it's interesting on multiple layers. I'm curious what feels really helpful to you about, or like has been part of your journey that's felt really helpful
Yeah.
with any of the metaphysical or alchemy or like healing pieces of any of that.
Mhm. Well, with astrology in particular, I really am understanding like the planets as these archetypal energies that are
Yeah.
swirling, kind of
Right.
like unfolding or unveiling this story of our history. Uh, in a way that, you know, the way that our planets are moving around the sun, like they'll never actually be in the same configuration twice. If they are, it would be like millions and billions of years apart. And so there's kind
Wow.
of this constant swirling that's happening, and they're having different relationships to each other. And um, it's just so reflective to me of like this sort of idea of a fractal holographic universe.
Yes.
And just I'm also doing working with a Jungian analyst right now. So just all of the archetypal stuff
So
is
cool.
um, we have all of these archetypes within us, and being able to explore them in different ways, or being able to see these hardships that you see your clients go through some crazy things,
Mhm.
and it feels random and chaotic, but then with this language of astrology you can find the meaning and how it's impacting your personal growth and development, and
Right.
how this is growing you as a human. And the thing I love most about astrology is like when you're going through a terrible time, it's going to end. Like the planets are going
Yes.
to move on and it'll be over at some point. So that's
Right.
one of the most helpful things for me. It's like, oh yeah, this sucks, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
have to hold on
Yeah.
and sit with it and it'll move into something else.
That makes me think. I think that was kind of my entrance into astrology was um like moon cycles and menstrual cycles and how we are able to focus and feel different things and do different types of things at different times in the month, even right with the moon cycles. And then that really resonated so much. And then kind of exploring, more layers of that. Um, I love the fractal universe
Yeah.
idea. Like I was thinking, it's similar to like not exactly a labyrinth, right? But all these ways that it's cyclical, but not exactly the same, right? So like you get this sense of um not deja vu necessarily, but like, oh, I understand this. Like kind of like with the cycles of the seasons. Like I love the cycles of the seasons. It just feels like it holds me with enough nuance and novelty and predictability, and I can feel it in my body. And like that's a cycle that really resonates with me. I don't know if that is something that resonates with you or not, like any particular cycles or anything that um, feel like they help you.
Yeah, I've been resonating with this season so much just in the past few years. I think even especially living in LA, we don't really get four seasons
Mhm.
in a noticeable way. But as I've been like leaning more into the spiritual side of things, like it does just resonate in a way of like being able to locate yourself and where you are. And sometimes you're in like an emotional winter in the middle of the summer, but like having
Right.
language to speak to that
Yes.
and kind of like see how those two things go together and don't go together, it really does help me just kind of like orient myself to things. And I love the way you put it around like it's both kind of new and different and predictable at the same time.
Yeah. Like that kind of flow is just right for me. And my nervous system and my like neurodivergent makeup. Um, and I really miss it being back in Florida where we don't have very many seasons either. I'm in North Florida, so like we have some, but that was one of the things I loved about Chicago that just felt like delicious. Like I just loved the cold weather coming in the fall. And I know for so many people, there's a lot of seasonal affective disorder and like it's really hard. And I know like it was hard in the winter when it's cloudy and cold, but also it felt like, oh, okay, well, this is the time to cozy in and snuggle. And like, there were a lot of silver linings and like things to appreciate about that too. So for me.
Yeah. And I wonder, how much of seasonal affective disorder is because we're expected to still produce at
Yeah.
this kind of
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
when we're actually supposed to be like, yeah, snuggling, cozying in, and doing less than usual.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's hard for me around Christmas time sometimes as well, because there's like sometimes I love the hustle and bustle, and sometimes I really need the more like what Advent would hold for my traditions of like the quiet and contemplative kind of things. And our culture doesn't do very much of that, but that is definitely what winter brings up, I think, right? Um, so I don't know if there's any more you want to explore about the like magical kind of stuff and healing and tarot or any of that. We can
I think we can probably
or
weave
we
it
can move
in
on.
as we go. Yeah, but yeah,
That's good.
pin it for now.
Um, I'm wondering if we could segue into the writing,
Absolutely.
um, how and where we connected. Although I just saw my notes about the Jungian analyst. I'm like, oh, that's really exciting too. We may come back around to that. Um, I'm curious how the writing group has been for you and having space to write, or like if you knew you were a writer before and what that's been like for you, even having that kind of space and knowing about yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, I've found the writing group through working with Megan as a kind of a, what do you call it, a coachee.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
do too.
And I love the way that she's put it together. It really is like a beautiful container. It feels very like safe and held. As far as my history with writing, I did do a lot of like short stories and poetry as a kid. I went to college in Philadelphia and got a bit involved in the spoken word scene there. So it definitely has been a part of my life, but I would say more into my like 20s and 30s, I had really kind of lost it and neglected it, put it on the shelf and, always intending to go back to it, but never quite made it until the pandemic. I was introduced to the artist way, and so I started doing
Mhm.
morning pages every day. And so I've been doing that for pretty consistently for the past 4 years or so. And then when Megan's group came about, it just was an opportunity to expand on that.
Um, yeah, so we've been in this group that meets weekly and it's just such a lovely container. It's free and I'll try to add it in the show notes if anyone wants to join us. Yeah, I've really, really enjoyed it. So I'm curious if there was a piece a few weeks ago that I really resonated with. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some or all of that with us right now. And then we can either talk about that or more about expression, expressing ourselves in writing or whatever
Yep,
feels helpful.
absolutely. Um, yeah, so this is probably going to be a few minutes. Maybe it's not as long as I'm thinking that
Yeah.
it is.
So for any listeners, like if you're like, okay, I want to listen to a tidbit and then get back to the talking, you can just fast forward a little bit. And I will also try to remember to put the timestamps in the show notes, but no promises. Hopefully I'll remember to do that. I'll write it down.
All right. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Go for it.
I dropped in, dark and red lights pulsing. Where am I? I'm being squeezed, contorted, pushed. I'm being pushed. Pushed out? Where are we going? Ahead. Why? It is not for you to know. Slowly, patiently, impatiently, I wait. A dawning realization. I am being born. Who is I? Am I me? Am I he? I am. The long-awaited, long-prophesied shaman being born. Whoa. Hold on tight. A twitch, a tumble. Just get that one last joint maneuvered into the right position and whoosh. I am free. What is free? Sopping, slimy, feeble, this achy, formidable land. Ugh, I want to go back in. I want to be held. Too late. It is time to grow. Let those bones shift and creak as sinew sprouts up alongside. Gosh, becoming human is uncomfy. Awareness splintered, swirling, shattering, and rearranging and kaleidoscoping back together and apart. It changes. It always changes. Keeps on changing. This fever dream that has no end until it ends. No wonder loving awareness gets lost, obstructed. There's too much to do, too much to know, too much to learn. The initiation goes on and on. I build a structure of myself and then I fill it with riches and wonder and torment and chaos. The spiral travels up and then down, waves upon waves of spiritual growth and development, and to what end? Is it enough to understand the secrets of the universe in an ever unfolding pendulation? Alas, a pause. I am me, but not now me. I am green, nature, mother, medicine, woman I am. It is my turn to give birth to another infinite miracle, to hold hands and whisper, to sing sweetly of this harrowed journey, to join the lineage of secret keepers and wailers and wanderers, and on until purple. I am purple now, royalty, a sage, weathered with time, posture screeching upwards against all odds, perched from my throne, legs crossed, cane in hand. This is not a young person's game, a faint smirk glimmering in the corners of my mouth. This is where I belong. Huzzah! Alas, I do not have the privilege to merely sit and watch. A calling bursts forth. I turn my face toward the heavens and receive the light-born brilliance. It is time to make a proclamation. The long-awaited, long-prophesied shaman is here.
Wow. That's so amazing, Jenna. I had to close my eyes listening to it because I just want to sit with it. How do you feel right now after reading it and being with it?
Hmm.
Just want to give space to
Yeah,
that.
I haven't read it since the 2 or 3 weeks ago that I wrote it. So I'm going through a whole journey all over again.
Yeah, I resonate with it so deeply in my body, like multiple different chakra levels, and just the possibilities and the layers of being that are greater than our just like practical everyday level of being, right? Like how you've entered into them and bring us with you there, is just so incredible. I feel like I could just listen to it over and over, like in a meditation or like contemplative, almost like even trance state. Some of the things I noticed and really resonated with were the I am. That's been something that's been really important to me in my journey as well, is like reaching this point where it was like the divine is I am, and I am I am. Like I just am, right? And I am part of that, and that is what it is and who it is. And my self-published book was called I Am Poems for Expansion and Renewal, because it was this very similar feeling. And I love that. And I loved hearing that that was a similar experience for you. And I'm not sure if you want to talk more about that at all or reflect on it. And then I had one more like big reflection about that as well.
Yeah, so I think the prompt that Megan had given us was about a time when you spiraled, and it
Mm,
brought up this kind of altered state experience I'd had once upon a time. And in that state, I was kind of grappling with like, oh, who am I? Am I me? And then
mhm,
the slow unfolding of like, yes, this is who I am now and who I'm becoming,
mhm.
almost like seeing into the future in a way, and
Right.
like deeply.
Well, like this timelessness around it, right? The more than linear time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, like feeling it, not just watching it, but feeling it all unfolding before you.
Yes. And it almost sounds like in you and before you.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I'm curious if you'd like to talk a little more about the shaman
Yeah.
piece. Like, I just love that. That's so exciting. Um, and what that's been like for you, either in reflection on this or in other ways.
Yeah. So in the experience, it was about a literal shaman I was working with, uh,
Mm,
who is from the Amazon basin, indigenous culture of the Yuanawa. And he is a young man, like 27 years old, or at least
mm,
he was at the time that I was working with him. But his grandfather was like this great shaman of the tribe and had prophesied that he was going to be the one to take up his mantle after he passed.
oh,
And so he had been initiated at like 6 years old. And
wow.
you meet him at 27 and he feels like he's 50, you know? And so just having the experience of like entering into this world and like being part of this story that's been told, and then having that story enter into my experience was very kind of both profound and confusing,
Mhm,
wonderful and strange. But then as I've been working with the Jungian analyst, we kind of try to go back over the experience and like what it actually means to me. It's not just about
mhm,
him and them, but like, yeah, about your own inner shaman and
mhm.
what is that meaning for you? How are you living in that and embodying it or not? And kind of all the different parts that can kind of merge and come from that.
Right. I have kind of two different directions we could go from this. You can tell me what feels best to you. One is kind of reflecting more on like that layer of being and also what it was like to see at least what you were able to observe and be a part of the shaman and how they were in their community. Like I have this question around like how do we be in this layer of being and connection and healing and also transition in and out with like our practical level of being and like relationships. And that's really, I don't know, been a big question for me lately and how to do that. Because I would just spend all my time there if I could. But I also have these really meaningful relationships in the practical world that don't they're not as interested in that.
Right.
Um, and then my other kind of direction is going with the like your experience with like working with Jungian archetypes and stuff like that in your own life. Maybe we can go with the first one first, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so even, yeah, going to Brazil, and we weren't actually in their village. They can kind
Mhm.
of come halfway and meet you in
Yeah.
a specific place.
Right.
But yeah, witnessing their way of life, like they don't
Mhm.
experience that separation. They are living in
Right.
it constantly.
Yeah.
And when you go there and experience it, you're like, yeah, I want to live like this all the time too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously a fantasy. Like, I don't have the wilderness skills to survive in the
Right.
Amazon, with,
Right.
just kind of natural tools and whatnot.
Right.
Um, yeah, then we have to come back into our Western life and figure out how to hold on to that and still be here and doing
Right.
to do to survive and thrive. And
Right.
it is a trip. Yeah, I don't know if I've fully figured it out, but I do think that that is part of the work that I'm doing and offering clients,
Mhm.
is like blending like the East and the
Mhm.
West, or the indigenous
Right.
and the contemporary, and um,
Right.
really trying to kind of make space for both. I really appreciate this kind of decolonization, re-indigenization that's happening in our
Mhm. Yeah,
field.
me too. Yeah.
And at the same time, like a lot of the kind of attitudes are, well, like throw out everything else that's not
Right.
that. And I have an appreciation for the, centuries and
Right.
work that's been done in our field as well. And it's like, okay,
Right.
how can we hold space for
Right.
all that is important and relevant to where we are and where we're going?
You know what comes up for me, like from an IFS perspective, internal family systems, for anyone listening, that's not familiar with that, which is somewhat similar to Jungian, but a little different, is like in a IFS, we work on like releasing burdens, but not releasing the parts, right? So like I wonder if that's possible with archetypes and with history as well, and like what we've ended up with, right, through all of the messy history. Is there a way to release the burdens and name and repair harm, um, and not have to like start over, but bring back in and allow the voices that have been muffled to like have their proper place and honor? I don't know. It's kind of my way of thinking of it. Curious, but I mean that I don't know how that translates practically necessarily, but I'm curious what you think about that or what your like reflections or additions to that would be.
I'm totally on the same page with you. It's like, yeah, we're all grappling with like, how do we make this correction
Mhm.
with the power that we have and don't have, and the systems
Right,
we're in, and I that's why I understand like there has to be such this hard push against the current system, because how else is this space going to be created?
right. Well, I wonder if it's more discovery and less figuring out, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of what this movement is. Um, at least in my mind, like this is something I've been thinking about as far as like epistemology, right? Like our way of knowing, our way of learning, our way of being. What if it can be more bottom up and more discovery led, which is how shamanism works. That's how like astrology works. That's how our lives work. That's how like flow works, right? Is increasing awareness, not going into like analyzing and figuring out.
Right.
And so like the more we release burdens and make space, that will come up, which is kind of like an IFS. The idea is, and how it works internally and should on any like ecosystem layer, you release the burdens, you bring compassion, you bring curiosity, and then what needs to be released will be released and composted, and what needs to be reclaimed or brought up and more self energy is what they call it, will come to the surface. And there'll be more collaboration and more integration and more wholeness and um, reclaiming like of each thing's proper place, intended
Yeah.
place together.
I really felt just like an opening in my body as you were just putting that.
Yeah.
Like,
Like we don't even have to tear anything down. What if it
no,
implodes?
things just fall. I was back in the Northeast visiting family over the summer and was driving past where the Man in the Mountain used to be in New Hampshire,
Mhm.
like this kind of face carved into the mountain. I don't know if it was naturally just appearing or if it was carved in.
Mhm.
It just, one day after hundreds of years, it just fell. It was gone, and it's
Mhm.
Hampshire's kind of emblematic symbol for their state for so long, and it just crept
Yeah.
up. And I think these big archetypal things sometimes they're
Mhm.
like, okay, it's time for that to be done.
Yes. And I also want to hold like there is a place for movement and like moving things forward. Um, and like after I'd said that about like just letting things implode or fall, like I think that's part of it, but also like I am a white presenting person from a very Caucasian European heritage, and I'm not sure about you, but I know you're white presenting as well, and that BIPOC communities might feel differently about that.
Yeah.
You know, there definitely needs to be movement at the pace of care for them as well. One of the people I love to listen to is Prentice Hemphill. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but I love their stuff. And they're a somatic therapist and we're part of Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of their work and their podcast is amazing. And they have a new book out, What It Takes to Heal. And it's all about how we combine the individual communities, societal levels of healing that like all have to happen together, right? So that in the movements or in the pushing or in the like, not just waiting for something to implode, right? But like where we are in the flow of that
Mhm.
has to do with our own healing and our own power and passion, I think, around that, right? What feels like, yes, this is the moment, this is my place.
Yeah.
Um, I've just created and should be in full swing by the time this podcast airs, a like online community called Collective Care that's like for empathic change makers, just for this purpose of having space to fully be ourselves and also be a part of the like personal and collective healing and care for ourselves and like exploring that and trying to create some of that interconnectedness from a place of really deep healing and that like space of practical to very metaphysical um, space. So we'll see. Hopefully that will um, flow, expand into what I'm feeling, envisioning, hoping into. But that is one of my recent efforts into that.
Amazing. Wish
Yeah.
you expansion. That would be so
Yeah. Thanks.
needed.
I'm curious, you mentioned like holding together East and West and like contemporary and indigenous with your clients. And I'm curious what that looks or feels like
Mhm.
or how that is for you.
It is very client led.
Mm-hmm.
I am I'm joining a consultation group with other sort of witchy therapists soon. So I'm very excited to learn
Cool.
more about how other people are doing it. But I'm still really feeling into like how to bring it into the therapy space or model for
Mm-hmm.
clients. Like what that can look like. 'Cause generally, my approach is a lot more kind of blank slate, hands off, and I'm trying to be more in the room and be more
Yeah.
experienced and kind of share more of like what I think is
Right.
important and
Right.
attract clients that resonate with that.
Right.
But I have clients who will pull a card every session and kind of reflect on like what they're noticing, what it's bringing in. And that sort of thing, or people will bring in their kind of psychedelic experiences to work through. I have a lot of clients from various different cultures that are just exploring like how to integrate the culture of their parents with their kind of American experience. So it can come up in so many different ways, and it really is just, yeah, being able to hold the space for them to hold the space within themselves of these kind of seemingly conflicting energies, but like, yeah, just allowing for them to kind of flow and intermingle and create something new, which even that imagery again, like reminds me of astrology and all of these other things. It's just like blending and merging and seeing what we can come up with.
Yeah. How has that been for you as a therapist, merging those two things? And also, like, are there people that you're reading or following that are doing that as well that have like helped inspire or guide that, I guess?
Definitely still a work in progress for me as a therapist. I do notice my sort of quote intellectual part, probably my white supremacist patriarchal part, has a deep resistance and judgment to my like spiritual, witchy, free-flowing part. And so I'm really trying to do the work to allow them to be more integrated with each other. There's fear of like reputation, right? Like, what will my colleagues think of me if I'm more out about my woo and all of those sorts of things.
Right.
But being able to just kind of name it and then allow that tension to exist. And then when you can sit with it, then it loosens up a little bit
Yeah.
more and kind of continually engaging with that process over and over again. It's really pushing the needle in a new direction for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm having like a few names come up of people that I've been reading or listening to, and I'm curious if you've heard of or followed any of them, or just to share with the listeners as well. John Prendergast, yeah, I don't think he has another R in there. And like he's written so many things, but the deep part is the one I've gotten most of the way through, and is this combination of psychology and spirituality and like the spiritual growth cycle and that level of like soul care. Adrienne Marie Brown, who's like a witchy leader, and Jennifer Mullen with her book Decolonizing Therapy, which is just so incredible as well. And then there's, like Edward Duran, Healing the Soul Wound, like indigenous kind of things, and toward psychologies of liberation, like liberation psychology and things like that as well. And Resmaa Menakem and people like that. So like that's kind of what's coming up for me and thinking about like who's been helping me and guiding me in that space. Um,
Yeah, I've been reading and following Camille Sapara Barton a lot lately.
oh, okay, cool.
Just I've been doing a lot of more of the somatic work and
Yeah.
kind of those people. And then I, in the past year, found out more about these grief communities and this grief work that's being done in
Ooh.
the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And there was this couple in the 80s from Burkina Faso named Malidoma and Sobonfu Somé, and their tribe
Yeah.
sent them to the US to teach the West how to grieve. And they settled up in, I think, the Washington area and started leading these trainings and teaching people how their tribe and their culture like regularly engages in grief work. And so that's really been speaking to me a lot too.
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember if it was Adrienne Marie Brown that had learned from her, or if it was someone else on Prentice Hempel's podcast that I've been trying to remember their name and find them, that had studied under them as well and kept referencing them. And yeah, that was just so exciting to me. I think individual and collective grief work is one of the medicines like that we most need right now. And like I'm trying to incorporate into our community once a month. And yeah, I think it is just such a huge part of us releasing and reclaiming. And like maybe that's the figuring out, right? And the discovery is like as we release and grieve and use that as compost and like what comes from that, right? And as we embrace pleasure and magic and like soul work and things that are not just logic, empirically or, evidence from the mind, but from like all of our wisdom centers, like that's part of maybe the way forward.
Mm. Mm.
I wonder if there's anything else you want to talk about with like archetypes that have been really helpful to you or like Jungian psychology or anything like that as we maybe move towards wrapping up.
Oh yeah, where could I even start with
Yeah,
that?
you can take as much time with it as you want. I've got time if you do.
Well, so I've definitely lived many different lives this time around. Um, but I have a whole kind of offshoot of my experience with the Black community, and just really kind of growing up in within that community as like one of the few white people, and then
Mm,
getting a degree in African American Studies in college,
mm,
and then learning about West African deities and archetypes.
Oh, I love that.
So it's not just solely confined to the Yoruba, but that is kind of the lineage that I've learned through of the Orishas. I'm pronouncing it with a Portuguese pronunciation because
Mm,
my partner is Brazilian, but Orishas. And so if you look at the West African Orishas and then the planets even, which have the
mhm.
gods' names, and then there's the
Right,
Roman correspondence, they're all naming these sort of same energies uh,
right.
from with some variation, of course, but you can kind of see this trajectory of how it's been adopted from one culture.
Yeah.
Um, And so I really like to do a lot of like mapping of like, okay, where are the planets now and
Hmm.
talking to which planets are talking to each other and like how do those energies um blend together. And then throughout my day, I'm thinking about like how am I experiencing Mars and Saturn
Hmm.
together, like as this really sort of intense warrior energy and this sort of
Hmm.
paternalistic grandfather energy, and like what does that
Yeah.
feel like in my body and how do I live that out? Uh, and so that's kind of the fun way that I like play with it on a day-to-day basis. And then in a lot of sort of meditative or altered state work, I might kind of focus on one particular archetype and explore what that means to me.
Hmm. I
You
love that.
is active imagination kind of technique that I've been getting into more as well.
That's cool. Tell me more about that.
It's sort of meditative, but yeah, you kind of get into a meditative or trance-like state, and then you just notice like sort of these characters or archetypes that emerge from the unconscious, and then you can kind of follow them and ask them questions.
Mm,
They'll sort of
right,
weave this whole story or narrative in front of you, and then you
right.
have to think about what it all means after the fact. Um, but it's the way that he really explored his dreams and developed a lot of his archetypal work. And so that's kind of how I've been learning how to do some of that in my own personal unconscious.
That's cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really like the planets as archetypes. Like that makes more sense to me than like the Greek god version of it, even though it's like similar, but the ways that that's come out, like the ways that I'm hearing about the planets or like other civilizations, is so helpful to add to it, right? That there's a lot more richness there, even though there's so much similarity as well. And then that has been so expansive and helpful to me personally, coming out of a really rigid patriarchal like
Mm.
conception of God, that where God is like actually more like a narcissistic dictator, like um and like not only can this one deity, like conception of God be so much more than now there's so many more ways of knowing the divine and like so many more expressions of it and so many more connection points um to me, which has been really exciting.
Yeah, like 1,000 faces. Like if you think of, I've even been dipping my toe into more of the Hindu kind of spirit.
Yeah,
So they have thousands of
right.
aspects that they appreciate. Yeah, it's so interesting to see how all these different groups and peoples have
Yeah.
thought about this sort of same unifying energy.
There's an IFS book I love that I don't know if I have it handy. I'll try to include in the show notes maybe, but we have so many resources already. But it has a picture of one of like the parts, um, like a common part that people have, which would be like the busy, like working mother and like all the different arms she has in their drawing and all the things they do look very Indian and like remind me of a lot of those drawings and archetypes, which is just fascinating. And like all, trying to hold all these plates at one time in the practical world, right? Like it just doesn't work. It's like such a burden and so exhausting. Um, and that might be one way of like bringing those two things together, right? Is like, I can't be all those things at one time in that way. So anyway, that would like take us on a whole nother
Yeah,
rabbit trail. Um,
we do
I'm
move through these different things all the time. Yeah.
yes. I'm wondering, before we close, like what is your main like centering or grounding point at this point in your life or at this time?
That's a good question. My clients always say that when they don't know the answer right away.
Yeah, I know. And it's okay if you don't have an answer. I just, that was kind of coming up for me.
Uh, well, I've kind of honed in on like my focus or like what's bringing me like joy and
Mm,
inspiration is
hmm.
all centering around art, nature, and magic. Like that's kind of
Yes. Oh, I love that so much.
just leaning into right now. And that's even like the my Instagram for my witchy page is just art, nature, magic because I that's the kind of purest expression of where I'm at with things
Oh my
and what's
gosh.
important for me.
And this is part of why I resonate with you and your writing so much is like, I'm just like, yes, all those things. Like that's totally me too. Um, so great. Um, okay, I have one last question and we can include this in the podcast or not, but I'm curious for you. I don't know if you find yourself having a lot of interaction with people who are maybe have no interest in those things or are suspicious of them or like are so much in that like Western
Mhm.
analyzer think through everything part and like what that's like for you and what like connection points are.
Mm.
for you, or if it feels like I don't have energy and space for that, right? Like I'm finding people who meet me here.
Yeah, I guess as a therapist in Los Angeles, I'm not meeting a lot of those people in my day-to-day life, but I do get
Uh-huh.
them as clients often enough.
Right.
And I think they probably choose me as their therapist because
Mm-hmm.
some part of them is wanting more of that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But usually there's some sort of attachment trauma that's like created so much
Mm-hmm.
constriction and like needing so much logic and things to
Yeah.
feel in control. So through the relationship, there is sort of an opening that happens. And then naturally, I just see them sort of gravitating towards spending more time in nature or embracing their creativity, or kind of finding ways through on their own. And so I think part of
Mm-hmm.
it is like an openness that naturally resonates with those things. And kind of being able to create that through our relationships can allow for more of that to exist.
Yeah, that's so cool. Was there anything else you have thought of that you wanted to make sure you mentioned before we wrap up? This has been so enjoyable.
Yeah, I feel very complete. I really appreciate you having me on and just really enjoyed this conversation. Anything
Awesome.
to share?
I think I'm good as well. I could go down like multiple like
Yeah.
other things, but they would take like quite amount of time, I think. So we'll just have to chat about that sometime. Um, thank you so much for being with us today, Jenna, and listeners. I will see you again next time. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you for being a part of our collective care and meaning making on who we are and what we need. Leave a review, subscribe, and follow us on socials at Catherine Quiring and at Who We Are Pod. This is your host, Catherine Quiring, signing off. See you again soon.